could we think about providing free preventive emptying in the seasons before we're likely to get big rainfall events? So there's ways of thinking about how we can use our knowledge that these events will happen ahead of time to plan for them. In terms of diversified approaches to manage infrastructure assets and risks, that might mean more about closing the loop in terms of water recycling, in terms of setting up modular systems that can be interconnected, so that if one fails, then you move to using another. A few more examples around responses, this time around the user engagement, around the infrastructure itself, around monitoring, and around the environment and public health. So involving operators in understanding the systems that they operate is a key one. Thinking about the climate change impact that comes with sanitation systems. So if we set up huge sewage systems everywhere, they have high pumping needs, that's high energy needs. We're then contributing to climate change rather than avoiding it. The top point on the right-hand side about should we choose to build very robust sanitation systems and invest in lots of concrete or building above flood tables, or do we need repairable options because we know that everything's going to be flooded, and instead we should be coming up with a solution that's something that can be repaired rather than is trying to resist the climate change impact. On the bottom here, one thing we can definitely do is promote win-win solutions. So there's an example from research we did, different research, but related to Sri Lanka. And there, when you look at whole systems in terms of agriculture, they're suffering from water scarcity, but the reuse of nutrients from fecal sludge and other organic matter is leading to much better water holding capacity of the soil and improvements to agriculture. So we can start to think again broader than our sector about climate change impacts and how we could be contributing in a positive way and vice versa. So final slide, takeaway messages are really just that the hazards are increasingly going to demand our attention. It would be better for us to think about them ahead of time and think about how we plan for them. And the uncertainty shouldn't be a reason for inactions. There are strategies that we have and have been developed in other sectors, and including particularly the urban water sector, that just haven't yet really been translated into the world of on-site sanitation and urban sanitation in developing country contexts. That resilience and vulnerability should be key for our attention, and not just on particular technologies and how they could be climate-proof. And that way we can design systems that are sustainable under evolving and uncertain conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Willits. I now have the pleasure to invite our last speaker, Dr. Suresh Rohila. He's a senior director of the Center for Science and Environment in New Delhi, an Indian-based policy think tank that is working on water programming and sanitation. He's the water program manager at CSE, and he's the academic director of the School of Water and Waste at CSE's Training Institute. He brings over 25 years of experience in research, capacity development, teaching, and policy advocacy for mainstreaming water sustainability in human settlements in India, Africa, and South Asia. Dr. Rohila, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. I would be presenting a journey of one of the most challenging and laggard state, I would say, Uttar Pradesh. If some of you attended a presentation from a colleague from a National Fecal Sludge Management Alliance in India, Professor Chari, he showed that we have made the elephant move. And I would say the elephant is there, which is one of the biggest state where we work is Uttar Pradesh. And this state holds 16% of the population, and it is the 4 times the size of South Africa, total population. It supports 200 million population, and the urban population is 50 million. So this is a brief background. I would be telling you the journey, how we made this elephant move, the biggest elephant, 16% of India's population in this state. Just to show you a chronology of events, how the sequence of events have shaped this journey. In 2009, we had NUSP, which is the National Urban Sanitation Policy, which proposed for and which made it mandatory that every city should have a city sanitation plan with a sub-component plan on fecal sludge management and excreta management. We had several program funding for public funding available under the leading national program. Sorry. Uh, we had this program launched with a huge amount of public funding available for infrastructure development for addressing sewage and septage. This was combinedly referred, but there was nothing happening on septage or fecal sludge. Then we had another national policy which came in, which was on fecal sludge management, a national policy on fecal sludge management in 2017. So this journey of 8 to 10 years, and then there was a situation of flux, that there was an uncertainty. There were all the projects and proposals which were moving towards preparing for more and more sewerage network or sewage treatment plants. The state where we are providing technical support in India, Uttar Pradesh, is also a state through which the national priority is given to a river pollution abatement, which is River Ganga, River Ganges, which is popularly known. And the maximum number of sewage treatment plants which are existing, 75 number, are in this state. So increased focus was on more and more hardware for sewage treatment. And on the opposite, the dependence was of the population on on-site sanitation. And there was no sewerage network, but there was either a focus on treatment or there was a dependence on OSS without a sewerage network. So this was a very interesting situation. And in 2013, Center for Science and Environment came out with a countrywide first assessment of 72 cities, that how every city was soaking into its own sewage or excreta. And these were the interventions which I am talking about. And we started working with in this report, it was published that, things are not working out and things have to change. There were a lot of graphs, there were a lot of pie charts, there were all line diagrams showing that, there are extreme situation, alarming situation. Then we thought there is a rethinking required and a change required. We started working on a tool with the global players called shit flow diagram. Many of you have heard about this. And we tried to say that how we could leapfrog into the, and we can introduce innovation in policy and practice. There was a policy, there was public funding available, nothing changing on the ground. And a friend of mine said that it was a shit flux situation. We were doing shit flow diagrams, but we were actually in a shit flux situation, and we were uncertain that what would happen. So we started mapping this, and what happened was in 2017 in FSM4, I presented some outputs of the number of shit flow diagrams across the country we had done, and we showed that this was a good tool, an accepted tool for advocacy, where we presented the results that it was able to move the decision makers to think differently. So I would present here that how we have mapped in a short time of 3 months, 66 cities sanitation value chain challenges and issues, and we have made this elephant move, and you would see it towards the end that how things have moved in this state. So we have done 66 cities shit flow diagrams. We have created state level and river basin level shit flow diagrams based on combining together the 66 cities diagrams. And our aim was to mobilize state level functionaries to implement FSM for achieving citywide sanitation. This was the goal, and I would take you through this journey. To give you the problem statement, to achieve the Clean India mission in this river basin, which also has UP as one of the contributing state, 30 million toilets are being planned. And 30 million toilets will generate 180 MLD of fecal sludge, and which needs to be cleaned. And there is no practice or there is no innovation in practice how to handle this kind of waste. This is the state, and we divided this state. The 66 cities which I am talking about contribute 75% of the total urban population, which is 50 million. And we had a team of researchers, 2 or 3 researchers were sent to every town or city which was part of this study. And we started collecting data for generating fecal sludge flows. And the fecal sludge flow diagrams were created, and they were SFD lights, we said. Because by the time we complete this, all 66 cities, the cities would have, data would have gone old, so that's why we wanted to do fast. So we spent 2-3 days, we did SFD light. So some results I'm presenting in front of you. In these 66 cities in this state, we found that 37% of the people dependent on septic tanks, which were connected to open drain. 49% households were dependent on fully lined tanks connected to open drain. And then these were the kind of containment systems which were there. You can see different shapes and sizes. And when my team visited, they found more than around 40 different type of containment systems on the ground. So this was a very interesting learning. Now, if we look at the emptying practices, we found that in these 66 towns, though as per the regulations, there are no manual scavengers or no manual emptying happens, there were around 10,000 manual emptiers in these towns which are still working. And there were 493 mechanical emptier, whatever the words have been used, honeysuckers or the truck mounted or tractor mounted honeysuckers. But then 10,000 manual scavengers were found when we interviewed these people. An interesting thing was that 79% of this business of emptying was done by private operators. And, but another interesting thing in this particular northern Indian state was that all the desludgers were using tractor-mounted vehicles. There was a tank attached to a tractor, which is not a very usual features in desludging part. So tractor-mounted desludging services were in practice. That the type of emptying services, I'm showing you some pictures. The narrow streets, the tractor-mounted desludging honeysucker, you can say. And in terms of extent of sewage or fecal sludge treated, you would say that because I said there are a number of sewage treatment plants were 75 in this state, so there was 47% of the sewage or the wastewater which was getting generated was treated. However, the fecal sludge which was coming out or getting stored in these on-site containment systems, almost 94% was unsafely disposed of, and there was no treatment to this. So this was an alarming situation. And the type of situation what existed where they were disposing of, there was no designated site. They were just dumping anywhere on the land or in the open area. So this situation needed to be converted into an advocacy and a campaign. So what we did was we had these kind of large data sets available from 66 cities. The red color shows when the situation is alarming. The first row shows the open defecation, if you see this one. So open defecation is red. There's nothing safe about that. Then we had, this is the on-site, and then there is off-site. So if you see this way, you'll see that a lot of red color showed that there was alarming situation. And we divided this number of cities which we surveyed into big cities, medium cities, and small cities. We looked at the large cities, and if you see that in large cities, we found that 47% of the coverage was through sewerage network. Then we also found that these cities had 43 sewage treatment plants existing. However, it was very interesting to note that the capacity was much more than the sewage which was reaching these plants. So they were underutilized sewage treatment plants. Either there was no sewage network or the sewage pumping stations were not able to pump the sewage due to electricity, 24/7 lack of electricity. And then these were one of the interesting issues. So 43 STPs, underutilized STPs in big cities. Class 2 category, 0.5 million to 1 million, we found that 72% were dependent on OSS. We found 11 STPs, sewage treatment plants. Capacity was more than the waste which was reaching these plants, so underutilized capacity again. We had small and medium towns. Over here also we found there were 10 sewage treatment plants existing. And if you see the red color, which says unsafe disposal, there was a large quantities of human excreta, which was still finding its way. Almost 89% of the human excreta was disposed unsafely. Then we went to very small cities. We still found that, yes, there was a focus on hardware creation, but there was no guarantee that the excreta was reaching that and safely treated. Very small towns and cities, 81%, 81% dependent on OSS. We had 9% open defecation. STPs, only 3 out of 21 cities in the cluster. But yes, there was focus on hardware side. We also tried to map small and medium big towns along the river Ganga, and we tried to understand what was happening because there was no linkage between urban sanitation and the river pollution abatement through treatment which was being planned. So we found that 40% of the sewerage coverage was there, 18 STPs were there in the cluster which was located along the river, but we found that again the sewage was not received adequate quantities, and all the STPs which were located were underutilized. So this was very interesting learning. And that's why also there was though there was a lot of money available, like for river pollution abatement, there was 2,000 crore Indian rupees available. In spite of that, 4,050 crore rupees for subtage management, things were not moving. There was a lot of advocacy, there was a lot of sensitization, but things were not moving. We created a state level SFD and projected to the state level decision makers that in spite of all that expenditure which goes into the hardware, you still have 73% of sewage and excreta which is unsafely disposed and it is not treated. So this was the aggregation of the city level SFDs to the state level. And then the observations at the state level were very alarming. We use this red and green color to communicate, which we were not able to communicate through pie charts, numbers, and other means which we were using earlier. That more than 60% of the total population is dependent on on-site systems like septic tanks and pit latrines. Septic tank effluent overflow of 50% of the population is discharged in open drains. 29% of the population is connected to sewer network, of which sewage of 16% of population is only getting treated. Then more than 80% of the sewerage network is in the state is only in 7 cities, and there are 635 urban centers. So there was a problem of the distribution of treatment facilities. Then excreta of 8% of the population is discharged still directly into the open drains. 4% of population still defecates in open, and excreta of 27% of total population is only safely managed. And no city in the is 100% sewered. So with this kind of a situation projected through shit flow diagrams, we overcome the stage of uncertainty and the flux which was there. So we created a action plan for cities. The programs which were there were on mission mode that in next 2 or 3 years, because there was a program, public funding for another, the program was for 5 years. So in 3 years, there were no projects which came up in the state. In spite of that, there was an alarming situation available. So we had to move fast. We were supposed to be catching up with several other states which are much ahead in terms of this game, who have understood this. So we created a proposed action plan for the cities. We said that the baseline mapping of the excreta flows can be done, then FSM plan can be prepared. Then the A3 was licensing of these desludgers. Then there should be a city sanitation plan, that it should not be just short-term intervention, but they should have a long-term vision and a buy-in. And then if some towns cannot afford to have an electromechanical based treatment system, they could go for trenching. Or if there is an STPs existing which have underutilized capacity, they could do co-treatment. And we wanted to have innovation in policy and practice, and at a scale. So we talked about all the steps, and we gave the cities which also lacked the capacity to develop a plan. So we developed a plan at the state level, as well as 4 model cities were taken up. We pushed that we will develop a model plan how these cities could move forward. So we created this plan, and we also step by step offered them that which city could develop in what way, a citywide sanitation, incorporating the existing strengths and also realizing the weaknesses. For example, if you look at this side, it shows the percentage of households with on-site sanitation. Then we have clustered the population size, and we developed this kind of approach where we say that full FSSM with dedicated treatment, where there is more dependent on on-site sanitation. However, if there is an existing STP, these towns should utilize the underutilized capacity of the sewage treatment plants and treat the fecal sludge there. So these kind of approach helped the state mainstream this into the day-to-day planning for funding projects. So as on date, what happened was in last 3 to 5 months, we have been able to convince the government of India to launch a submission linking the urban sanitation, which is citywide sanitation, and FSM to river pollution abatement. So there is a dedicated program on addressing fecal sludge management in the towns along the river Ganga, whereby there was a focus on sewerage network and STPs, which will happen in next 15 years or 30 years. However, there's a dedicated program for linking urban sanitation with river pollution abatement. 33 cities, because we released first report for 33 cities, all 33 cities have reported to have taken credible action towards citywide sanitation. Out of these 33 cities, there are 52 fecal sludge treatment plants or co-treatment plants at the stage of tendering. Selection of the technology provider has been done. 4 cities have declared ODF, ODF plus plus. ODF was that 100% access to toilet, but also that what happens to the liquid and the fecal sludge which comes out of from these toilets. So out of these 33 cities, 4 cities have declared themselves ODF plus plus. And also there has been a state level task force created to mainstream citywide sanitation and see through that this framework which has been developed through these learnings of SFDs which were used for advocacy gets implemented on the ground. So this was the kind of in last 4 to 5 months progress on how to mainstream citywide sanitation and move the focus from sewage and sewerage to sanitation across the cities. So we also, the scale, as I said, is we are dealing with population 4 times the size of South Africa's total population. Looking at that, what we have done is we have developed some online web-based tools for all the cities because we can't reach out to all the cities. We have developed online tools for how they could prepare city sanitation plans. And these are available online for anybody to access. We have also developed an inventory of decentralized wastewater systems, fecal sludge management systems, technologies, best practices across the world. It's not local. And these technologies and case studies and projects are accessible by cost-wise, technology-wise, and also reuse typology and geographical location-wise. If you people want, you can visit this website and have a play around with these tools. So this will help these 66 cities and the 653 urban settlements in the state of UP to mainstream this, citywide sanitation. The report which I'm mentioning is available for download from our website, from CSU homepage. And this entire initiative is also part of the SFD promotion initiative, which we have undertaken with GIZ, as well as University of Leeds and Videk Loughborough and several other global partners. And I think we have been able to make a contribution for mainstreaming citywide sanitation with the use of SFD becoming an integral part of the process. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. That brings us to the end of our presentations. We now have ample time for questions and debate. Our 3 speakers are ready to answer any questions. Maybe why you think of a question, I'll start with Dr. Rohila. You've shown how SFDs have been prepared at scale in UP. How were they taken up by the mayors, the decision makers at the urban local bodies as a tool to influence decisions?
Very good question. I have missed one step in my presentation that the cities where we are working, we have a provision of city sanitation task force, which involves ward level elected representatives to be part of that. So the 4 model cities where we are working, we presented this to the mayor and the elected representatives, and they have shown full support for implementation of this. So there is a city sanitation task force, which is chaired by mayor and a commissioner, and they have shown buy-in. We have secured buy-in for this.
Thank you. My name is Belinda Calagos. I'm an independent consultant. Thank you very much for some really thought-provoking presentations. My question is to both Professor Rohila and Professor Dr. Willett. First of all, to Professor Rohila, so you have a plan now, you have a model for city sanitation planning using this shit flow diagrams. Do you think that that already includes, or how can you make it include, climate sensitivity for sanitation, for the city plans? Is it already addressing things that the three issues that Dr. Willits had identified in terms of hazard, in terms of resilience, in terms of vulnerability? And if not, how do you think those issues could be incorporated into your current models?
I think directly it doesn't include, but indirectly all the challenges and issues when we engage with the city, because there is another parallel plans for cities which city have to prepare for climate proofing. There's a national action plan for climate change which addresses these issues, and every city is supposed to prepare that. However, because we work in this sector and we are aware of the best management practices, so we ensure that, for example, water efficiency. Instead of going from water augmentation plant, they should be water prudent and water frugal, such that they generate less sewage, and they are also much more confident in addressing the impacts of climate change. So this is integral to part of city sanitation plan, and city sanitation plan is not just a plan for sanitation. It is planned for water, drainage, solid waste, and it connects cross-cutting to the issue of fecal sludge management. So all other angle, drainage, water, and other areas connect with water. So that's why it is getting.
Hello, this is Andres Hueso from WordTrade, and had two quick questions. One for Juliet about the something that we've been looking into in terms of the opportunities to, in addition to make the links between climate and sanitation, also trying to tap into some of the climate funds, green funds for sanitation and water-related work in urban areas. So I wondered if you had any thoughts or ideas on that front. And to Rohila, I wanted to ask about specifically these 4 model cities. I was wondering to what extent these efforts have reached the informal areas, the slums in the cities, and in that sense, because you said that the cities have declared themselves ODF, like if there's any certification plan or process, and what is the ground reality, especially to what concerns the sanitation in slums. Thanks.
So on the climate financing, I think absolutely. I mean, we've had various presentations this week about financing and the financing gaps, and I think we're not tapping that whole world of climate finance to the extent that we could. And I know in Australia, for the Pacific Island areas, which are very, very affected by climate change, most of the climate adaptation funding is not going at all to the water sector. And I think we as a sector haven't joined the dots and been in the right places to advocate to say that most of the climate issues in the Pacific actually are water related, and it should be top of the agenda. But we need to be part of other conversations outside of our sector to be able to mobilise and be part of those conversations. So I think there's much more we can and should do in that area.
I would like to answer that the coverage or the extent of service provisioning for addressing the fecal sludge management in slum areas. There is a defined methodology. How do you declare an area ODF, and then which areas go for ODF++, which city goes for ODF++. Certainly there is a process that, the wards, every part of the city, which includes slum areas or, where informal settlements are there, there are 5 people who are supposed to certify that this area can be declared ODF++. Then there is a third party checking, an independent party which checks these claims. And also there is a community feedback provision in this to cross-check whatever claims are being made. So I have not been, but my team has been to those cities when we were mapping the thing. But later on, the ODF++ is through a certification mechanism which the state has put in place. There's a third-party cross-checking, and there's a feedback mechanism included in that. If Malini, you want to add something, I don't know, because that's the process for third-party certification. Anything you want to add? That's what we are. It's a government process whereby they declare this thing.
Okay. Any further questions? None?
The name is Maria. I'm from SNV, Indonesia. My question is to Dr. Reddy. Very nice presentation, thank you. It's impressive how the level of accuracy and the type of decision making one is able to do with the example you gave. But of course, I'm wondering, you were working, referring to a very small city, and you know, how do you see this type of data collection working with the same level of accuracy, the same possibilities in terms of decision making, bigger city? Thank you.
Actually, we have been working in this city for several reasons. This city has a very high amount of vulnerabilities. And when I say vulnerabilities, it's compounded because of the intersectionalities as well. Women, fisher folk community, caste, economic background. So it's a town which is a very difficult town to work with. That is one aspect. Other thing is that it's a riverfront town, and the challenges of FSM are immense. So it was a decision by the state that this particular city should be taken up, because if one can handle challenging cities, then one can handle other cities. Having said it, the pilot was initiated keeping in mind that the lessons from this would be drawn for a statewide scale-up. So the preparatory work for that is already in order, and both in terms of methodology of rollout as well as costing. So for example, the state, we've figured out that when we go for a statewide rollout of GIS systems, it would, the cost of rolling out is less than 1.5 to $2 per household for data collection as well as dashboard as well as management of the data system. So it might seem like a small town, but it's a good town to pick up a pilot in.
I have maybe a follow-up question to that. How do you institutionalize a new tool like this GIS tool for decision making within the town? Is there a dedicated section in the planning department? And how do you ensure that in the long term the data will also be updated?
So just as in my slides I had said that the state has instituted a national, non-sewage sanitation cell, which looks at FSM in all its 110 towns. So in line with that, the city has a non-sewage sanitation cell, which is headed by an environment engineer and a team of another person who's a gender expert, and one more person supports this team. So it's a 3-member team. And while this particular study was outsourced to a GIS firm, this 3-member team's capacities has been built. And at the state level, they anyway have a very large command and control system through which they monitor the public toilet maintenance, school sanitation across all the 110 towns. So that system and that capacities at state level exists. And through this study, we could see that even a small town, the capacities could be built.
Right, we have one more question. Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, you. So 2 questions. 3.
Hi, my name is Kate Medlicott from the World Health Organization. It's a question for Juliet. So we've been working on climate resilient WASH for a little while, but like so many things, it really focused on the water part first, and we're really starting to think about the sanitation piece a bit more now. But we did work on a vulnerability assessment in Ethiopia, and it was quite a heavy quantitative process. And I think what came out of it in the end was that it was really a lot of work to do it quantitatively, and it didn't really tell us a lot more that wasn't already known within the sector. So as we're going forward, we're trying to look at more of a qualitative approach. But the question I have is, when it comes to accessing some of the climate financing, there's quite a pressure to show the additionality of the investment because of climate change, not just ordinary WASH expenditure. So I'm just wondering if you could comment on the approach, whether quantitative or qualitative, towards doing a vulnerability assessment and the extent to which that would allow us to access the climate-related financing.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, great to hear that you've been, as WHO, working on this, because I think, yeah, we all need to give it more attention. To me, yeah, the vulnerability dimension needs qualitative approaches to understand. It's asking why and how questions of around people, and quantitative data is also of value, but won't, yeah, I think you've already said in your question, it won't give us answers that help us design interventions that will address those vulnerabilities. I'm not across the details of access to climate funds in terms of the different criteria on that, so I don't feel well placed to answer. But I would have thought that we, in our sector, we could pull together enough to demonstrate the additionality in terms of climate change. I think the effects on water have the knock-on effects straight into sanitation, and that should be possible to pull together. But for the vulnerability side, I think, yeah, we need in-depth understanding.
Lucy?
Yes, my name is Darryl Jackson. My question is about the first speaker with the GIS system. You used 100% coverage when you did that, and I presume that was a very conscious decision to get every household. So when you're going to the state rollout, are you also doing 100%? And then are you planning on doing upgrades so that it's current, and what's the thinking about that?
Yes, that is the thinking, that it would be 100%. And in fact, the state is already going for, what is it called, Suresh? Door-to-door RFID on door-to-door. No. Digital door numbering system is already being implemented in the state. So they are covering the entire 100% of properties. So this would be a layer on top of that, and it would support the entire process. So yes, 100% for the state. Yeah, so that links with property tax, it links with digital door numbering, and several others. So the idea is, once you have a digital door numbering, it links to property tax, and it also links to services such as electricity, water bills, and this will come as a layer. The state has a very strong GIS system running already, so it's not, it's going to be an incremental on the existing.
Yeah, thanks. I have a question. I'm Lucy from Practical Action. I have a question for Dr. Rohila on the Uttar Pradesh. You used the sort of SFD light process, so just a quick assessment for very good reasons that you explained. So my question is, what are your plans for the future? Will you, do you think you should go back and see what has changed over time? Or would you plan to go back and do maybe a deeper dive in a few selected cities to verify whether the quick assessment has any gaps or things that might have been overlooked? Maybe even like the idea that something is ODF, has like maintained its status? Was it really ODF in the slum communities? Those kind of issues, which in a quick assessment maybe they might have been overlooked. I don't know.
It's a good question, but I forgot to tell you that CSC has not done this as a study as a one-off study. We have a program support unit at the state. We will follow up with the cities. We have also, if you download the report and see at the last page of the report, we say that we are setting up a forum of cities who manage fecal sludge. We would be going back to these cities and following up on these. And actually, there will be pre and post SFD. As I said, if you see, as on date, 33 cities have taken credible action. So almost I have to revise those 33 SFDs because they have taken some credible action in terms of, licensing of desludgers, or their fecal sludge goes to sewage treatment plants. So already I'm seeing changes. So within 3 months, with the advocacy now and with the ODF++ protocol being pushed through the central government, so things have already changed. So we are organizing an SFD week in April 1st week of this year, and I'm sure that more than 50 cities out of the 66 cities, SFDs would have changed. And we will follow up with that because we have a tie-up with the state to follow this through for at least 3 to 5 years. And our plan submitted is for 5-year action plan.
Sorry, I just wanted to add something. It actually relates to a poster that we have about the definitions of safely managed, and I think it's worth a comment because it relates to the presentation I gave. So the sheet flow diagram has a certain set of assumptions in it, and one of them is that containment, if it's not emptied, ends up green. And if you're talking about climate change and leaking containment, etc., lots of those are not safe. And if you monitor just using a sheet flow diagram, you won't actually ever show change because you may not actually focus on that issue because it's already green, but also it won't get better even if you spend effort and time on that. The sheet flow diagram won't change. So it's really just a word of caution about how we use the different tools we've got and which are for which purpose.
Okay, thank you. We have time for one last question. If that's not the case, then we'll bring to an end this session on citywide approaches. Let's give a hand to our 3 speakers. Thanks.